Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking into a really difficult case, one that didn't just get attention across Massachusetts, but truly shook public confidence in, well, local law enforcement and the whole justice system.
Yeah, it's a heavy one.
We're analyzing the sources surrounding the death of Boston police officer John O'Keefe back in 2022 and the incredibly intense legal journey of his girlfriend, Karen Reed.
It's a story with just so many layers. Tragedy, obviously, but also these deep community splits and, importantly, documented problems with the investigation itself.
It really is high stakes and very tough subject matter.
Uh,
So our approach here, our absolute mission, is to give you a clear, factual path through it all. Strictly impartial. We want to lay out the evidence, the competing theories, and the, frankly, dramatic legal outcomes.
and the amount of material is just vast.
Hmm.
We're talking about incredibly detailed cell phone data, conflicting forensic reports, official audits of the investigation. It's a lot to synthesize.
2 full trials as well.
Right. The first ended with a hung jury, which tells you something right there. And the second trial, it finished with a verdict that I think it's fair to say surprised a lot of people watching closely.
So our job, really, is threefold. First, nail down that minute-by-minute timeline from that night. Second, clearly present the two totally opposing legal arguments. Was it a motor vehicle homicide, or was it, as the defense claimed, a murder inside the house followed by a cover-up?
And third, and this is crucial, we have to shine a light on the major controversies that really compromised the integrity of the state's investigation from early on.
Before we dive into the evidence, though, it's vital we remember the person at the heart of this, John J. O'Keefe III. He was 46 years old, a Boston police officer, a 16-year veteran on the force.
Highly respected from all accounts.
Yes, and highly educated, too. Degrees from Northeastern University, a master's in criminal justice from UMass Lowell. But maybe the most poignant detail, the sources really emphasize this, was his role as a guardian.
That really stood out.
After his sister and brother-in-law passed away, John took on the guardianship of their young children, his niece and nephew. He lived with them in Canton, Massachusetts. Understanding his dedication there, it just underscores the immense loss his family and the community felt.
That commitment definitely provides critical context. And his girlfriend, Karen Reed, the defendant, she also had a significant professional background, a financial analyst at Fidelity for many years, and she was also an adjunct professor at Bentley University.
Right, she had degrees from Bentley, too, finance undergrad and master's.
Yeah. And the couple, they weren't new. They'd met way back in 2004, apparently, but had gotten back together more recently in 2020 during the pandemic. She was living in Mansfield at the time this all happened.
Okay, so knowing who they were sets the stage a bit for the events of that night. Let's get into that evening, Friday, January 28th, 2022. The chronology here is just everything. Tiny differences in time, seconds, minutes, they became huge points of contention in court.
Absolutely brutal cross-examinations over mere moments.
So, John O'Keefe and Karen Reed, they start their evening around 9:00 p.m. at C.F. McCarthy's, a bar in Canton.
But they didn't stay long.
Mm.
Pretty quickly, just before 11 p.m., they moved across the street to the Waterfall Bar and Grill. And that move was significant
Why is that?
because that's where they met up with a small group of acquaintances. And this group included another Boston police officer, Brian Albert, and his wife, Nicole. Also Nicole's sister, Jennifer McCabe, and her husband, Matthew. And also an ATF agent, Brian Higgins.
So a gathering involving people connected through law enforcement, local, and federal.
Exactly. A social get-together.
Okay, so the Waterfall Bar closes around midnight. The group decides, let's keep going, head over to the Albert family's house at 34 Fairview Road. Apparently, Brian Albert Jr. was celebrating his 23rd birthday.
Right. And we know from security footage, Reed and O'Keefe left the Waterfall together at 12:11 a.m. Reed was driving her SUV, a large Lexus LX 570.
Okay, 12:11 a.m., they leave the bar. Now we get to the moments that were argued over endlessly. The arrival at the house, the drop-off.
Yes. Red apparently didn't know the way well, so Jennifer McCabe called O'Keefe's phone at 12:14 a.m. to give directions, using her phone's location to help guide them. McCabe and her husband actually got there just a bit before them, around 12:18 a.m.
And then Red and O'Keefe pull up outside 34 Fairview Road at 12:24 a.m. This is where the digital trail gets incredibly precise.
Super specific. O'Keefe's phone. It logs the closing of his navigation app at exactly 12:24.26 a.m.
Then his phone's location data shows him stationary right in front of the house at 12:24.38 a.m.
Stationary. And then, for the next 7 minutes or so, between roughly 12:25 a.m. and just before 12:32 a.m., his phone records absolutely zero movement activity. Nothing.
That's the first critical pause, isn't it? 7 minutes of no recorded steps or motion.
And during that time, O'Keefe is getting messages. At 12:27.33 a.m., Jennifer McCabe sends an iMessage, just here. His phone shows it was marked as read about 15 seconds later.
And there was also a phone call, a short one, 7 seconds, answered from McCabe at 12:29:44 a.m. The defense really jumped on that call.
They argued it proved O'Keefe was alive, conscious, able to answer his phone just minutes before the key events. Then, right before the final recorded movement, another iMessage from McCabe at 12:31.47 a.m. telling him to pull behind me.
Okay, so according to Karen Reed's later account, O'Keefe told her he was just going to pop inside quickly, check if they were actually welcome for this after party.
Right after that last text from McCabe.
Yeah.
And that's when the phone data shows the critical movement. 36 steps recorded, starting at 12:31.56 a.m.
36 steps. During that very short burst of activity, the pull behind me text gets marked read at 12:32.06 a.m. O'Keefe's phone locks for the last time at 12:32.09 a.m., and the movement itself, those 36 steps, ends at 12:32.7 a.m.
And that time, 12:32.16 a.m. That's it. That's the last recorded movement activity on John O'Keefe's phone. It wouldn't register any movement again until after 6:0 that morning, almost 6 hours later.
A huge gap.
Huge. Now, Reed claims she waited a bit, got frustrated when he didn't come back to the car, and then she drove off, heading towards his house on Meadows Avenue. And it's right around this time, as she's leaving Fairview Road, that her Lexus SUV logs something called a text stream trigger event.
Okay, let's pause there. Text stream trigger event. That sounds technical, and I know it became a huge point of argument. What exactly is that?
Yeah, it definitely did.
Yeah.
So text stream is basically the diagnostic tool that Lexus and Toyota use. A trigger event is a timestamp showing the car's onboard system recorded some kind of abrupt or severe action.
Like what?
Could be really hard acceleration or sharp steering or heavy braking, something that might, say, cause the vehicle's stability control system to engage. But critically,
Yes.
these events don't automatically mean there's a collision. That was the core dispute. The prosecution argued it marked the impact with O'Keefe.
But the defense pushed back hard.
Absolutely. They argued it could have been caused by slamming on the brakes or hitting a big pothole or even just making a really aggressive turn leaving the scene, not necessarily hitting a person. And the timing was also disputed how precisely that trigger timestamp lined up with that 12:32 a.m. window.
Okay, so a potentially crucial piece of data, but open to interpretation. After Reed leaves the area, the timeline shifts focus immediately to her state of mind. This became really the emotional core of the prosecution's case.
It really did. Between 12:33.35 a.m. and 12:36.40 a.m., just moments after leaving Fairview Road, O'Keefe's phone logs 7 incoming calls from Reed, all unanswered.
7 calls in about 3 minutes.
Right. She gets to O'Keefe's house, her phone connects to his Wi-Fi there at 12:36 a.m., and then she starts leaving this string of voicemails and iMessages. And the content, it was angry, very critical.
Extremely. The first voicemail, timed at 12:37 a.m., just minutes after she would have left the Albert Street, she says, "John, I fucking hate you."
And it escalates from there. At 12:59 a.m., she leaves another message. "John, I'm here with the fucking kids. Nobody knows where the fuck you are, you fucking pervert."
The language is harsh and accusing.
Very. By 1:10 a.m., it's even more explicit, repeated accusations. It's 1 in the morning. "I'm with your fucking niece and your nephew."
And the final documented message, this was sent just before she apparently fell asleep next to O'Keefe's niece, around 1:17 a.m.
Yeah, and that one she says, "John, I'm going home. I cannot believe part is inaudible. I need to go home. You're fucking using me right now. You're fucking another girl. O'Keefe's niece is sleeping next to me. You're a fucking loser. Fuck yourself."
So this entire sequence, 7 unanswered calls, voicemails just dripping with anger, aggression, accusations of cheating. This became the prosecution's motive, didn't it?
Yeah.
They argued this showed a drunken rage that led to her hitting him.
Exactly. That was the foundation. This wasn't an accident. It was fueled by rage and alcohol, leading to reckless or intentional harm.
But while Reed is leaving these furious messages, O'Keefe's phone is essentially dead to the world.
Pretty much. It's receiving messages it can't answer. 3 more unread iMessages come in from Jennifer McCabe shortly after Reed's calls start. "Hello at 12:40 a.m. Where are you?" At 12:42 a.m. And another, "Hello at 12:45 a.m.
And crucially, as you said, the phone shows 0 movement between 12:32.16 a.m. and just after 6:0 a.m.
Right. So that fact, the phone being completely stationary for almost 6 hours, it directly contradicts any defense idea that maybe he was inside the house for a while and then moved later,
Unless he was moved right after that 12:32 a.m. activity stopped and the phone stayed with the body outside the whole time.
Precisely. And supporting that idea, the phone being stationary and outside, is the battery temperature data.
Ah, yes, this technical evidence became really important for the prosecution, too.
Immensely important. They argued it showed O'Keefe, or at least his phone, was exposed to the cold right after that supposed drop-off. The data showed the phone's battery temperature was 72 degrees Fahrenheit at 12:37 a.m. Still warm, basically.
Oh.
But then it drops steadily, consistently over the next hours. It's down to 66 degrees by 12:45 a.m., 61 degrees by 12:53 a.m., hits 50 degrees by 1:36 a.m., and eventually bottoms out at 37 degrees by 6:35 a.m. Close to freezing.
So a slow, steady cooling curve.
Exactly. That's compelling technical evidence suggesting the device, which remember was found near O'Keefe's body, was sitting out in the freezing cold for hours, starting almost immediately after that last recorded movement at 12:32 a.m.
Which directly challenges the defense idea that he was maybe inside the Alberts house warm for any length of time before he died.
It makes that scenario very difficult to believe, based on the phone data.
And all of this leads us to the absolute core contradiction of the whole case. Karen Reed insists she saw John O'Keefe go into the house after she dropped him off.
That was her consistent claim. Watched him walk in.
Every single person who was inside 34 Fairview Road that night, all 8 of them. Brian Albert Sr., Nicole Albert, Brian Albert Jr., Caitlin Albert, Jennifer McCabe, Matt McCabe, Sarah Levinson, Julie Nagel, they all testified under oath.
What did they say?
They all said they did not see John O'Keefe enter the house at any point after midnight.
So her claim versus the testimony of 8 witnesses inside, that's a massive conflict.
A fundamental clash. And that's really the setup for the 2 completely different legal theories that played out in both trials.
Okay, so the timeline shifts, again, dramatically. Around 6:00 a.m. that morning, that's when the body's discovered. Red apparently woke up much earlier, around 4:38 a.m., and immediately started trying to call O'Keefe again.
Still couldn't reach him.
No. And her distress seems clear from the calls she then made. First to Jennifer McCabe at 4:53 a.m., asking for help finding him. Then she called their friend Carrie Roberts at 5 a.m., urging her to come help search too.
Right. I remember Roberts testified about that call, said Red sounded completely distraught, yelling things like, "John is dead. Carrie, Carrie."
Yeah, and apparently O'Keefe's niece also heard Red saying things earlier that morning, expressing worry, asking questions like, could I have done something? Or could he have been hit by a plow? Shows anxiety, maybe confusion.
So the journey back to 34 Fairview Road was frantic. Reed, McCabe, and Roberts arrived back at the Albert house around 6 a.m.
And it's Reed who finds him. Finds O'Keefe's body lying near a flagpole in the front yard, partially covered by snow from the storm overnight.
And the timing fits the phone data again, right? O'Keefe's phone health app registered its first movement since 12:32 a.m. at 6:04.01 a.m. Exactly, right when the body is discovered and presumably moved or attended to.
Okay, so the discovery itself immediately sparks another major conflict in testimony, what Reed said right then and there.
This became huge at trial. Reed always maintained she asked a question born of panic and confusion. Could I have hit him? Did I hit him? A question.
But that's not what others heard.
No. Jennifer McCabe, and importantly, 2 paramedics who arrived soon after, they all testified that Reed repeatedly made a statement, an admission. I hit him. Not a question, a declaration.
Just the difference between a question mark and a period, but legally.
Yeah.
Enormous. Absolutely enormous. That reported statement, I hit him, became a cornerstone of the prosecution's argument that she knew exactly what she'd done.
Okay, so this really sets the stage for the 2 opposing theories of the case. Let's break them down clearly. First, Theory A, the prosecution's case. What was their argument?
Led by prosecutors Adam Lally and Laura McLaughlin, their narrative was pretty straightforward on the surface. Karen Reed, intoxicated at the evidence of her drinking that night and consumed by the rage we heard in those voicemails,
Right.
either intentionally or recklessly backed her large SUV into John O'Keefe right after dropping him off around 12:32 a.m. manslaughter or second-degree murder.
And what evidence did they use to support this?
They focused on connecting the damage on her Lexus to O'Keefe and the scene. First, pieces of her broken right rear taillight that were found in the snow near where O'Keefe's body lay.
Physical evidence linking her car to that spot?
Yes. Second, they pointed to hair evidence. Hair found on Reed's car that was consistent with O'Keefe's mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA.
Okay, mtDNA. We should probably clarify what that means, because the defense challenged this, right?
Big time. So mitochondrial DNA is inherited only from your mother. It's not unique like nuclear DNA. So while the testing showed the hair could have come from O'Keefe.
It could also have come from his mother, his siblings, any maternal relative.
Exactly. It could match potentially thousands of people in his maternal line. So it's useful for exclusion ruling people out, but it's not definitive proof it was his specific hair on that part of the car.
So suggestive, but not a smoking gun for the prosecution.
Correct. Strong enough for them to argue contact, but it gave the defense an opening to argue reasonable doubt, especially when they started alleging evidence tampering later on.
What else did the prosecution rely on?
The digital evidence, definitely. That text stream trigger event from the Lexus, they argued that marked the moment of impact. And they pointed to the damage on Reed's car itself, the broken taillight, a dent arguing it was consistent with hitting a person.
So their picture was, she hits him in a rage, possibly fueled by alcohol, damages her car, leaves the scene, and only comes back hours later when the panic sets in or she realizes the severity.
That was the core narrative for Theory A.
Okay, now let's pivot to the complete opposite. Theory B, the defense's case. What was their argument?
Theirs was far more complex, alleging a third-party culprit and, crucially, a cover-up involving local law enforcement.
A cover-up? How did they frame that?
Their argument was stark. John O'Keefe never made it out of 34 Fairview Road alive after going inside or trying to. They theorized he was beaten badly inside the house, and then his body was moved outside, positioned near the flagpole, and basically left there for Reed to find, setting her up to take the fall.
And the motive for this alleged cover-up?
The defense pointed directly at the close relationships. The Alberts, their friends, their family, many were current or former police officers related to police or federal agents like Higgins. They argued this created a massive conflict of interest that led investigators to protect their own network rather than find the truth.
So they attacked the physical evidence presented by the prosecution.
Systematically, they brought in their own experts, including, significantly, 2 accident reconstruction experts who had initially been hired by the FBI during their own parallel investigation into the case.
The FBI had experts look at this. And what did they conclude?
According to the defense, these experts concluded that O'Keefe's injuries were fundamentally inconsistent with the kind of damage seen on Reed's SUV.
Inconsistent how? Can you elaborate on that? That seems vital.
Yeah, it was a cornerstone of their case. The experts pointed out that the damage to the Lexus, a broken taillight, some dents, suggested a relatively low-speed, low-impact event. But O'Keefe's injuries, they were severe.
What kind of injuries?
We're talking significant blunt force trauma to his head, extensive bruising all over, a fracture near his eye socket, and what called a massive subgaleal hemorrhage, basically, major bleeding under the scalp.
So the experts felt that level of injury didn't match a simple reversing bump from an SUV.
Exactly. They argued that the severity suggested a much higher force impact, maybe multiple impacts, possibly involving hitting a hard surface, not just a glancing blow from the back of a car going slowly in reverse in the snow.
Did they propose alternative causes?
They did. They suggested the injuries might be more consistent with being struck by fists, or maybe a heavy object. And they also raised questions about some lacerations on O'Keefe's arms.
Yes.
Suggesting they could potentially be consistent with an animal attack, specifically pointing to the Albert family's dog, a German Shepherd mix, which they argued might have been involved in some kind of altercation inside the house.
Wow. So directly challenging the cause of death and suggesting it happened indoors. What about the digital evidence? How did the defense counter that?
They went hard after Jennifer McCabe's Google search history. They claimed forensic analysis showed McCabe searched for how long to die in cold at 2:27 a.m.
2:27 a.m. That's hours before the body was found, around 6 a.m.
Precisely. The defense argued this timing proved McCabe knew O'Keefe was outside, exposed, and potentially dying, long before Reed supposedly raised the alarm. It suggested prior knowledge inside the house.
But the prosecution disputed that timing, didn't they?
They did. Prosecutors argued the 2:27 a.m. timestamp wasn't when the search was performed, but merely when that specific browser tab was last opened or accessed on McCabe's phone.
So, ambiguity around the technical data again.
Exactly. But the defense hammered the point. The search term existed in her history around that critical time. O'Keefe's phone was silent and stationary. It created significant doubt about McCabe's credibility and what the people inside the house knew and when they knew it.
And then there was the anonymous tip. That played a role, too.
A significant role in shaping the defense narrative. Reed's first lawyer, David Yannetti, received a tip not long after her initial arrest. This tip basically laid out the cover-up story.
What did the tip allege specifically?
It alleged that O'Keefe got into a fight inside 34 Fairview Road and was beaten by Brian Albert Sr. and his nephew, Colin Albert. And then, the tip claimed, his body was dragged outside onto the lawn by Brian Albert Sr. and an unnamed federal agent later identified by the defense as Brian Higgins.
And the defense presented this in court.
They did, supported by statements from a private investigator they hired, Stephen Scanlon. They argued this wasn't just a vague theory. They had specific names, a sequence of events: assault inside, body moved outside to frame Reed. It shifted the focus dramatically, from a simple hit and run to potential murder and conspiracy.
So if the evidence itself was already creating these two totally different stories, the conduct of the lead investigator seems to have poured gasoline on the fire. We need to talk about former Massachusetts State Police Trooper Michael Proctor.
Yeah, the issues with Proctor, they weren't just procedural missteps. They became central to the defense argument that the whole investigation was fundamentally flawed, biased from the start.
He was the lead investigator assigned by the Norfolk DA's office.
That's right, from the State Police Detective Unit assigned to Norfolk County. And his conduct eventually got him fired, formally, in March 2025. The reasons cited were serious: sending derogatory, defamatory, inappropriate texts about Karen Reed to his friends.
While leading the investigation into her.
Exactly. And also sharing sensitive investigative details with people outside law enforcement. Just major breaches of conduct and impartiality.
The details that came out were pretty shocking. Sources confirm that just 16 hours into the investigation, before the autopsy results were even known, Proctor was texting about the case with his high school buddies in a group chat.
It's unbelievable. Initially, he actually texted them that he thought they won't be able to prove Reed hit O'Keefe with her car, which suggests even he had early doubts about the prosecution's main theory.
But then immediately followed that with just vitriol towards Reed.
Yeah, extreme personal bias. The text presented at trial, they're quoted directly in the sources. He called Red a whack job cunt. He texted, "She's fucked." And maybe most appallingly, he texted that he hoped she would kill herself.
The lead investigator expressing hope the suspect kills herself,
while actively investigating her for murder. It's hard to overstate how damaging that is to the credibility of the investigation. Violent, misogynistic bias, clear as day, right at the top.
And beyond the texts, there was the issue of his relationships with witnesses.
Yes. Proctor admitted on the stand during the trial that he hadn't initially disclosed his personal relationships with some key witnesses, including members of the Albert family. He knew them personally.
He didn't report that conflict of interest.
Not until the defense essentially forced the issue. This admission just played right into the defense's narrative. See? Conflicts of interest, covering for friends, the network protecting itself instead of seeking justice for O'Keefe.
And the defense used other details to paint the investigation as unprofessional too, right? Things like how evidence was collected.
Oh, definitely. They made a big deal, quite effectively, about the methods used at the crime scene, pointing out investigators used things like red Solo cups to mark potential evidence spots, and apparently used stop-and-shop grocery bags to collect items.
Not exactly standard evidence collection protocol for a homicide.
Not at all. It sounds minor, maybe, but it allowed the defense to raise serious questions about professionalism, chain of custody, potential contamination, basically casting doubt on the integrity of any evidence collected that way.
And the accusations went further than just sloppy work.
They did. The defense flat out accused the investigators of planting evidence, specifically related to Reed's broken taillight.
How did they argue that?
They presented testimony and some digital analysis suggesting Reed's taillight might have actually been intact after midnight on January 29th when she left the scene. So finding pieces of it near O'Keefe's body later that morning, the defense implied, meant those pieces must have been put there by investigators.
Investigators who, they argued, were compromised by these conflicts of interest and needed evidence to fit the narrative that Red hit him.
Exactly. Manufacturing evidence to frame her. It's a serious allegation, but Proctor's bias and the procedural issues gave it traction.
The impact of all this went way beyond the courtroom, too. We learned that the U.S. Department of Justice got involved.
Yes, that was confirmed. In January 2024, letters became public confirming the DOJ's general counsel was overseeing a federal investigation into the Norfolk District Attorney's Office, Michael Morrissey's office, specifically looking at their handling of this case.
Federal oversight. That signals serious concerns at a high level.
Absolutely. It suggested the worries about how the local investigation was run were substantial enough to warrant federal scrutiny.
And locally, in Canton, the community was completely split.
Deeply polarized. You had residents who firmly believed Red was guilty and others equally convinced she was framed in a police cover-up. It got very public, very heated.
I remember reading about a rolling rally.
Yeah, July 2023.
Yeah.
50 cars driving through Canton, protesting what they saw as a cover-up. Some even demonstrating outside the homes of people involved in the case, like the Alberts and maybe even Proctor. There were later reports of vandalism against lawns of people supporting Reed, too. It got ugly.
The pressure on the local police department must have been immense.
So intense that residents forced the issue. At a special town meeting in November 2023, they actually voted to fund an independent audit of the Canton Police Department's handling of the case.
An independent audit? What did that find?
It resulted in a big 200-page report released in 2025 and documented specific, pretty damning failures by the first officers who responded to the scene that morning.
Okay, let's go through those specific failures. They seem critical to understanding how the defense could argue reasonable doubt so effectively. What was the first one?
Probably the most critical.
Yeah.
The audit-confirmed officers failed to take photographs of John O'Keefe's body at the original location where it was found, near the flagpole, before he was moved into the ambulance.
No photos of the body in situ.
None. From an investigative standpoint, that's catastrophic. It immediately opens the door for the defense to say, see, you can't prove he hasn't moved there. The scene was compromised from the start. No pristine visual record of where he fell or where he was placed.
Okay, what was the second major failure?
Lack of professional witness interviews. Key witnesses, especially those inside the Albert house, weren't formally interviewed in the crucial hours right after O'Keefe was taken to the hospital.
Yeah.
When interviews were eventually done,
They weren't recorded.
they were not recorded. Again, this allowed the defense to argue that testimonies could have been coordinated or influenced in the meantime. It cast doubt on the reliability of those witness accounts.
Third failure.
Scene security. Both the state police and Canton police failed to properly secure the Albert residence or maintain a constant police presence there in the hours after the body was found.
So people could potentially go in and out, evidence could be removed or altered?
That was exactly the defense argument. That evidence might have been cleaned up, destroyed, or even planted before the state police crime scene unit finally do their more thorough search later on.
And there's a fourth point about video footage.
Yes. The audit found Canton police didn't promptly turn over video footage they had from their own systems showing Reed's Lexus while it was impounded in their Sally port.
Why was that significant?
While they eventually released it, the delay fed into the defense narrative that officials were hiding or manipulating evidence related to the car's condition. All these procedural failures, documented by an independent audit, they became the foundation for the defense strategy. They argued the state just couldn't meet its burden of proof because the investigation itself was so deeply flawed by incompetence and bias.
Were there consequences for the officers involved in these failures?
There were. Trooper Proctor, as we said, was fired in March 2025 after the first trial's revelations. Sergeant Yuri Buchanek, another state trooper involved, was transferred to an administrative role, basically taken off active investigation duties.
Acknowledging issues with his decisions.
Seemed that way. And locally, Canton Police Detective Kevin Albert, who was related to the Albert family, and present at the scene, he was put on leave and later got a 3-day unpaid suspension based on his trial testimony and his actions that morning. So tangible fallout showing the damage to the department's credibility was real even before the final verdict came down.
Okay, so with all this conflicting evidence, the opposing theories, the huge problems with the investigation, the legal process itself must have been incredibly complex and unpredictable. Let's walk through how the charges against Karen Reed evolved.
It was definitely a journey. She was first arrested and arraigned back in February 2022 in Stoughton District Court. The initial charges were manslaughter, leaving the scene of an accident, and motor vehicle homicide.
And she pleaded not guilty.
Yes, pleaded not guilty, posted bail $80,000 and was released. But then things escalated. In June 2022, a Norfolk County grand jury returned new indictments.
Upgrading the charges significantly.
Very significantly. They indicted her for second-degree murder, manslaughter while operating under the influence OUI, and leaving the scene of a collision causing death. Much more serious felony charges.
So that set the stage for the first major trial, which started in April 2024. You said it lasted 8 weeks.
8 intense weeks. Testimony from 68 witnesses. The prosecution really leaned into Reed's angry voicemails, the evidence of her drinking, the taillight pieces, the hair evidence, trying to build that picture of rage-fueled vehicular homicide.
And the defense team. Alan Jackson, Davy Giannetti, Elizabeth Little.
They countered hard with a third-party culprit theory. They hammered away at the investigation's flaws. using Proctor's texts, the audit findings, the conflicting expert testimony about the injuries, using all of that to argue reasonable doubt and point the finger at people inside the house.
Did the defense try to get the case thrown out before it even got to the jury?
They did. They filed motions to dismiss, specifically citing those federal crash reconstruction experts who said O'Keefe's injuries didn't match the car damage.
But the judge didn't grant that.
No, the presiding judge, Beverly Canton, denied the motion to dismiss. However, she did give the defense significant room to present their third-party culprit theory, as long as it was based on, quote, relevant, competent, admissible evidence.
That allowance was important, though, right? It meant the defense could really explore the cover-up angle in detail.
Absolutely. It forced the prosecution onto the defensive, having to defend not just Reed's alleged actions, but also the credibility of the Albert family, Jennifer McCabe, and the state police investigators themselves.
And in the end, that first jury, they just couldn't reconcile the two stories.
They couldn't. After all that testimony, all the media attention, they deliberated for 25 hours. A long time. Then, on July 1st, 2024, they sent a note to the judge saying they were deadlocked. They cited fundamental differences in their beliefs about the evidence and the timeline.
A hung jury.
Judge Canton had to declare a mistrial.
What happened after the mistrial? Did the defense try again to stop a second trial?
Oh, yes. They argued aggressively that the charges should be dismissed. They claimed that talking to some jurors afterwards revealed the jury had actually agreed Reed was not guilty on the most serious charges, second-degree murder, and leaving the scene, even if they were stuck on manslaughter.
But the judge didn't buy that argument.
No. So Reed's lawyers appealed that denial up the chain, first to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, and they even made an emergency request to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Trying to block the second trial on double jeopardy grounds, saying she couldn't be tried again for charges the first jury might have acquitted her on.
Exactly. But all those requests were ultimately denied. The courts basically said a mistrial due to a hung jury doesn't preclude a retrial. So the path was cleared for round 2.
Which must have put immense pressure on everyone involved. The second trial started when?
April 1st, 2025. You could feel the intensity ratcheted up. The prosecution brought in additional specialized lawyers. Reed beefed up her defense team, too.
Was the evidence presented much different in the second trial?
A lot of it was similar, the voicemails, the phone data, the conflicting witness accounts. But there seemed to be an even greater focus on disputed technical details from her car and more scrutiny on estimates of Reed's blood alcohol level that night.
And the defense strategy.
Double down on the framing and cover-up allegations. They continued to challenge how O'Keefe died, pushing the alternative theories like the dog bite possibility, and really hammering the timeline of the taillight damage, arguing it was altered after the fact.
So, similar arguments, maybe refined, presented again. The defense rested its case on June 11th, 2025. Jury deliberations started a couple of days later.
Under a huge media spotlight by this point. Global attention, really.
And the verdict this time, it came relatively quickly.
It did. On June 18, 2025, the jury returned, and they found Karen Redd not guilty on all 3 major felony charges.
Not guilty of second-degree murder, not guilty of manslaughter while OUI, not guilty of leaving the scene causing death.
A stunning outcome for many. And it immediately put all those investigative failures, Proctor's conduct, the audit findings, front and center, as the likely reason the state couldn't convince this second jury beyond a reasonable doubt.
But it wasn't a complete acquittal, was it? There was one conviction.
That's essential to note. The jury did find her guilty of the lesser charge, the misdemeanor, operating under the influence, OUI.
So they believe she was driving drunk that night.
Yes. They convicted her on that count.
And the sentence for just the OUI.
It was pretty standard for a first-time OUI offense in Massachusetts. Judge Canton sentenced her to 1 year of probation. She had to complete the state's impaired driving program. It's often called the 24D program. It involves education and maybe some treatment. She also had to do outpatient substance abuse treatment, and her driver's license was suspended for up to 90 days.
So probation and programs, but no jail time. A conviction that acknowledged the drinking, but acquitted her of causing O'Keefe's death.
Precisely. It gave the prosecution something proof of intoxication, but it was a clear rejection of their core homicide case.
And the legal battles aren't entirely over, are they? There's a civil suit.
Right. The O'Keefe family filed a wrongful death lawsuit back in August 2024. It names Karen Reed, accusing her of killing John, but it also names the 2 bars, C.F. McCarthy's and the Waterfall.
Accusing them of over-serving her alcohol that night.
Exactly. That civil case was put on hold while the criminal trial finished. Now it's expected to move forward. So the fight over legal responsibility for John O'Keefe's death continues in civil court.
And one final point on accountability, what happened with Trooper Proctor's attempt to fight his firing?
After the second trial ended and all his misconduct was aired so publicly, Proctor initially did appeal his termination from the state police. But later, in October of that same year, he withdrew the appeal.
Essentially accepting the firing.
It appears that way, implicitly accepting the state's decision based on his actions.
So stepping back from the details of the trial, this case really does feel like a profound example of institutional breakdown, doesn't it? The tragedy of John O'Keefe's death got so horribly tangled up with these deep issues within local law enforcement.
Absolutely. Conflicts of interest, questionable practices. And it wasn't necessarily an isolated incident in that area, which makes it even more disturbing. There's a direct link, or at least a parallel, to another case in Norfolk County.
You're talking about the Sandra Birchmore case in Stoughton.
Exactly. Sandra Birchmore was a young woman, 23, found dead in her apartment back in February 2021. Initially, local authorities ruled her death a suicide.
Initially. But that changed.
It did, thanks largely to federal investigators stepping in the same kind of federal scrutiny that eventually looked into the O'Keefe case. The feds alleged foul play in Birchmore's death, and a Stoughton police detective, Matthew Farwell.
He was involved in both cases.
He was involved in the initial investigations of both Sandra Birchmore and John O'Keefe, and Farwell was later charged with Birchmore's murder.
Wow. So the pattern is suspicious death, questionable initial local investigation, federal intervention revealing major problems, and often involving the same personnel.
That's the pattern that emerges. Reed's defense team specifically requested police documents related to the Birchmore case during the O'Keefe trial. They pointed out that key figures like Norfolk DA Michael Morrissey, Canton Police Sergeant Michael Lank, and Detective Kevin Albert were involved in aspects of both investigations.
And the Birchmore case had its own strange twists too, right? Something about paternity.
Yeah, adding another layer of complexity. It was initially believed by many, including Farwell himself, that he was the father of Birchmore's unborn child. But DNA testing later, in 2025, proved that wasn't true. Just more confusion and questionable circumstances surrounding that related case.
So the parallel is stark. It suggests the problems in the O'Keefe investigation, the poor evidence handling, the conflicts, the potential cover-up narrative might not have been unique, but maybe indicative of broader systemic issues in how investigations involving law enforcement associates were handled in that county.
It certainly strengthens that interpretation. And the Karen Reed acquittal, particularly on the major charges, could be seen not just as the state failing to prove her guilt, but as a direct consequence of the state presenting a case built on evidence that was just too tainted by bias and procedural failures.
It's striking how digital evidence played such a central role, yet was ultimately undermined. The phone logs, the battery temperature, that data told a powerful story about O'Keefe's final hours.
Incredibly powerful circumstantial evidence.
But in the end, it seems the proven failures of the human investigators, Proctor's texts, the audit findings, the scene contamination, created too much reasonable doubt for the jury to ignore that digital trail. And public pressure, the protests, the local reporting on the cover-up theory, that clearly played a role in forcing transparency, too.
It absolutely did. The intense scrutiny likely prevented aspects of this case from being easily dismissed or hidden. The trial, in many ways, became less about just Karen Reed's guilt or innocence and more a referendum on the integrity of the investigation itself.
The prosecution simply couldn't overcome the damage done to the credibility of their own key witnesses and evidence handling.
When the lead investigator is shown to be deeply biased, when basic protocols aren't followed, when conflicts of interest aren't disclosed, it becomes almost impossible to meet that high burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
So the legal outcome provides justice for Karen Reed on the murder charges, but it leaves that fundamental question, how exactly did John O'Keefe die? Tragically unanswered for his family and the public.
It remains unresolved in that sense.
The devastating loss of John O'Keefe, it underscores the human cost, the grief his family endures. But the case itself serves as this stark reminder of why the systems we rely on for justice must be beyond reproach, especially when law enforcement investigates one of its own.
Which really brings us to the final thought we want to leave you with. Considering the not guilty verdict on the murder and manslaughter charges, considering the documented, proven flaws in the original investigation, the audit, Proctor's conduct, the federal review, what does this whole saga truly tell us about the absolute, non-negotiable need for rigorous police accountability? And what does it say about the necessity of demonstrating unimpeachable investigative integrity especially when conflicts of interest are present, if the state ever hopes to meet its burden of proof in these incredibly sensitive, high-profile cases.
Because if you can't trust the process,
Then the pursuit of truth, the pursuit of real justice for victims like John O'Keefe, becomes fundamentally undermined.